The Mandalorian, Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The Mandalorian receives a message from Greef Karga telling him Navarro has been overrun by Imperial troops led by the Client, who is desperate to recover the child. Greef proposes that the Mandalorian use the child as bait in order to kill the Client and free the town. In return, Greef will square things with the guild for the Mandalorian, which would allow him and the child to live in peace. Sensing a trap, the Mandalorian recruits Cara Dune and Kuiil the Ugnaught to assist him. It's during this moment that the Mando also learns that Kuiil has rebuilt and reprogrammed IG-11, who comes along with the group as they journey to Navarro. Upon arrival, they meet Greef and his associates, but en route to the town they're attacked by winged creatures who capture one of the bounty hunters and take most of the group's blurg transports. Greef himself is gravely injured as a result from the attack, but the child uses the Force to heal his wound. In return, Greef has a change of heart, shooting his associates down and explains his original plan to kill the Mandalorian and take the child to the Client. The group then formulates a new plan which will see Greef pretend that Dune has captured the Mandalorian, and all three will enter the town to meet the Client. Meanwhile, Kuiil is told to return the child to the ship, as the Razor Crest's defense systems will keep them safe from any Imperial attack. During the meeting, the Client receives a call from Moff Gideon, whose troops surround the building and then begin opening fire, killing the Client and his men in the process. Gideon afterwards arrives and boasts to the Mando that the child will soon be in his possession. As in the desert outside of the town, Gideon's scout troopers track the fleeing Kuiil, kill him, and then kidnap the child. So, whoa, that just happened. Talk about a truly insane, emotional, and tension-packed episode. Sure, we've had episodes before that had bits and pieces of these, but never something like this. Prior to Chapter 7, my two favorite episodes were 2 and 6, both directed by Rick Famuyiwa. And I know a lot of other people who loved Deborah Chow's Chapter 3. But other than the Mandalorian fight scene, then I wasn't a big fan of it, and I had problems with that episode. However, Deborah Chow has completely won me over with her work on Chapter 7, and I can honestly now say that all the hype about her is legit. Like I said before, this episode had it all: action, emotion, and plenty of tension. There was so much happening here that it kinda felt strange at first, as usually in The Mandalorian we're stuck on one location, doing one or two things, and that's it. Yet here we saw old loved characters return, Mando visiting multiple planets to get his crew together, surviving a dangerous night on Navarro, formulating a plan, meeting with the Client, ambushed by Gideon's forces, and then that whole ending. There was so much going on in this episode, and I loved every bit of it. The musical cues were also brilliant, and that ending, oh boy, the feels were real there. I'd never in a million years would have thought that I'd get emotional over an old Ugnaught getting killed in cold blood, but yet here we are. But let's talk about the nice things here instead. Like for starters, I'm most happy about seeing the Mando finally form his crew. Seeing Cara and Kuiil again was awesome, but I especially loved the return of Greef and IG-11. I knew we would eventually see these two again, but was especially curious on what terms and how they would come back. Suffice to say, I'm very happy on how they did it. Greef's betrayal and redemption kind of reminded me of Lando, while with IG-11 I'm interested to see if he's still a capable killing machine despite losing his prior memories. Although it's hilarious to see an assassin droid offering to make you tea or dinner. We also need to talk about the child here, as we learned quite a lot about him in this episode. Like for example, Kuiil telling us that it's not something genetically engineered, so that most likely throws out those theories out the window that suggested that it's a clone of Yoda. In addition to that, we see the child use two Force powers in this episode, both light and dark. First is the Force choke on Cara, where he thinks she's hurting the Mando, and then later the Force heal on Greef. It goes without saying that there's definitely something unusual with this kid, as while we know Force-sensitive babies can use the Force, it's never to this advanced degree. The child for sure is very special, and that may be why the Imperial Remnant want it so much. Chapter 7 also finally introduces Moff Gideon, who's looking like we all assumed he'd be, the main villain of the season. Unlike the client's remnant forces, who are dirty and rough looking, Gideon's troops are clean and pristine, even with a squad of Death Troopers at his disposal. I wouldn't even be surprised if Gideon had a Star Destroyer hovering over Navarro. You could tell he's one of the more serious and competent of the Imperial Remnant. His customized TIE fighter was also impressive just to see it land on the ground like that, which leads me to believe it's likely got a couple of other special modifications made to it that we'll see in the season finale. Now, with that said, I did have some minor gripes and nitpicks with this episode, I know, right? Awesome episode, but the stuff has to be said. Anyways, for example, how did Gideon know that the child wasn't in the container? Especially considering at that point he was still presumably in a Star Destroyer, not even on the planet. Not to mention the Imperials didn't even know the child was actually with Kuiil until after that moment. And that was only because the Scout Troopers intercepted the Mando's comlink frequency with Kuiil. Another thing I didn't like was the Death Troopers executing the client and his men. Like, what's the point of that? If Gideon is as smart as he thinks he is, then he should know better. It's gonna take more than that to kill the Mando. And yeah, it was just a lame way to get rid of the client overall. I mean, come on, Werner Herzog is awesome on this show, and that's how he goes out? I don't like it. Lastly, and yeah, believe me, I know this is super nitpicky and nerdy, but I did find it weird to see so much stormtroopers show up in the New Hope armor, rather than the later version armor from Return of the Jedi, which we were led to believe was the standard stormtrooper dress code at that time. Granted, I very much realize this is something that only me and 5 other people will notice and complain about, but still, I felt I should mention it. Then again, seeing the Imperial troop transport show up in a live-action show gave me a big smile. So I guess just because of that, then I'll happily look past the armor nitpick. Overall, I'd say this episode is the very first epic that we've got this season. Sure, there have been some weaker episodes, some good and very good, but Chapter 7 is without a doubt an epic. The quality of it reminded me of a damn good Game of Thrones episode, and that's a compliment I can't say I could ever give to any other episode we've got this season. Now, with just how good Chapter 7 was, I can't help but imagine how amazing the season finale next week will be. It's for sure got a lot of high expectations to live up to now. But that was my take on this episode of The Mandalorian. Let me know what you all thought about it in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.